And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo, and let's talk about prices. This is something that I didn't think I would ever be talking about on my channel, but it seems to keep coming up over and over and over again, most recently on my Commander rules changes video, where I just talked about different rule changes that I would consider in the format. And so I thought it'd be a good time to finally tackle this issue. It's been an issue that I thought I would have to tackle at some point eventually, and this seems like a good as time as any. So before I get to the main topic, I'm going to go into a little bit of history of myself to give a little bit of perspective here. I don't usually talk about myself personally on my channel, but I think it is a little bit relevant here to understand where I'm coming from. I grew up very poor, 7 kids in my family. My dad didn't make a lot of money. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, so we didn't have a lot of money. I started playing Magic at 18, and I had a part-time job at the time. I had graduated high school and I had a part-time job, so I could actually afford to buy some Magic cards. Basically, all the money I made from that job I spent on Magic cards because I still lived at home. And the limitation to the cards that I could buy were only limited by how big my paycheck was. But I moved to the big city, as it were, where there was a sort of an LGS because my hometown didn't really have one. And it was, of course, a very different experience. And one of the big things was there was a guy there who was one of those guys who he had lots of money. I think he had really wealthy parents, and he always had all the best cards. A play set of all the best cards all the time. He always played all the best decks. In fact, he had the Tellurian Academy deck, right? I started playing in Tempest block. So Urza's Saga block was right after that. And of course, the infamous Tellurian Academy deck. He actually had that deck. He got all of those cards. He was basically net decking before there was really any net decking. The internet was a brand new thing at the time, so there wasn't any Magic on the internet. I don't even know how he was going about it, but somehow he was figuring out what all the best decks were at the time, and he would go out and buy all those cards and make those decks. And of course, he shows up at the LGS with the Tellurian Academy deck and whomps all of our butts. And I didn't love it. It's not fun. And why I'm talking about this is I understand where people are coming from, where it kind of sucks to have to compete against all the best cards when you can't have them. I completely understand that. And part of my deck building strategy came from that. It's a problem. I see it as a problem solving thing where I'm trying to figure out how to beat this deck with the cards I have available to me. And that's how I've always built decks. And when I see comments like I did in that rule changes video, I talked about Sol Ring and how a Mana Positive Mana Rock it's all the same to me. Sol Ring or Mox Sapphire, what's the difference? To me, those are equal power level. But for a lot of people, cost is an issue, right? And I talked about this in my Is It Casual or Not video, how typically from my experience, the cards that people really get annoyed by in casual games are the ones that are powerful and also really expensive. Nobody gets annoyed by Sol Ring because everyone's got one. But people get annoyed by a Mana Crypt, which is essentially the same thing because it costs a lot of money and they don't have one. A couple people commented on that video that they don't want to see the Moxes unbanned because, of course, they're not accessible to everyone and there's only going to be a few people that get to use them. My response to those people was there's already a lot of that going on. I mean, how many people have a Gaia's Cradle? That's a very expensive card, really good in the format, obviously. How many people have one of those? Or even if you look at a card like Tabernacle or Mishra's Workshop, those are even more expensive cards and really, really powerful cards, right? Are those accessible cards? So the argument of we should ban or not unban a card because of accessibility, I think is not a great argument. There's lots and lots of cards that aren't accessible or that aren't affordable, which brings me to the other part of this discussion, which affordable is completely relative. It's completely relative depending on the person. And I talked about this in my 10 cards videos. In the beginning, I didn't have prices on those videos, okay? I was just mentioning cards like, hey, maybe you might want to try this out in your deck. And after I did a couple of those videos, people were like, oh, I'd love to play that card, but it costs this much money, or these cards are too expensive. That's why people don't play them. And that's why I started posting prices on those videos. One guy had said, Eladamri Lord of Leaves would be great in my deck, but it's like a $40 or $50 card. I can't afford that. And what I had responded to that person was, that's not a lot of money for some people, right? For some people, $50 is not a lot. For other people, it's a ton. It's all relative. For me, I probably could buy a Gaia's Cradle if I wanted to. I don't have one. I've never bought one. I don't want to buy one. I'm not going to spend $1,000 on a Magic card. That's me. For a guy who's been playing Magic for over 20 years, I wouldn't spend $1,000 on a Magic card. That's just me. The most expensive card that I've actually ever cracked in a pack was a Serra's Sanctum. Like I said, I played in Urza Saga Standard, cracked a Serra's Sanctum in the pack. I was, of course, very excited about it and immediately traded it away to get some other cards because I had no use for it. I didn't have an enchantment deck, so I immediately traded it away to get some cards that I actually wanted. I was actually making a 4-color control deck at the time, and I think a Wrath of God and a Reflecting Pool were a couple of the cards that I got in that trade, so I was pretty happy with that. I don't myself own any really expensive cards. Survival of the Fittest is the most expensive card that I own. I just have the one. Got it a long time ago before it was really expensive. I think that's probably the most expensive card I own. You know, and that's another thing. A lot of these cards expensive, but you know, should we punish people who have been playing the game for a long time and got a Survival of the Fittest when it was $10? You know, I don't think we should. And that's another thing. These prices change all the time. There are even cards in my 10 cards video that the prices now are completely way off, because when I made that video just a few months ago, the card was maybe $4 and now it's $20. Because of me, maybe? I don't know. Nevertheless, that's just the way it is, right? That's how it works. That being said, there are other options. There's lots of options out there if you don't have a lot of money. Another quick story about my history in this game. I actually got onto Commander because of proxying. I used to proxy lots when I played Modern, and not because of cost issues, because I couldn't afford the cards necessarily, but because I'm an art guy. I'm a huge art guy, and I like doing alternate art on my cards. And so I started getting into the whole proxying subgenre, I guess you could call it. And I was on a lot of different forums or threads where people were doing proxy cards all the time. And there's just some amazing ones out there. And a lot of the cards at the time were Modern legal cards that people were proxying because Modern was the most popular format at the time. And I started coming across proxies on these forums like Nether Void and Mana Crypt and Heuristic Study and Force of Will, and I was like, what are these proxies for? Like, I'm starting to see all these proxies and I wasn't sure what they were for because they weren't Modern legal, and somebody told me they're for Commander. That's actually what brought my attention to Commander. I didn't even know it was a format at the time. And so I started looking into it, and of course I eventually started playing it. But because proxying is what brought my attention to Commander, I always just assumed that that's what everybody was doing anyway. You know, a lot of these cards, not just expensive, they're just not really available at all to players. There's a lot of really old cards that it's really difficult to get your hands on if you're playing Commander. So I just assumed proxying was a regular thing in Commander already. You know, so what's the social contract there? I don't know. Honestly, I've talked about proxying a little bit on my channel. I've had quite a few people talk about it in the comments of my videos. What's the, you know, Commander etiquette there with proxying? You know, again, that's a playgroup thing, maybe. If you're in a playgroup, probably you do have rules there for that kind of thing, whether you can do it or not, or how much you can do it. For me personally, I wouldn't give a damn how much like if somebody had an entire deck proxied, I wouldn't care. I don't care at all. What I care about is the deck casual. That's what I care about. If I show up at a table and I'm going to play a game with a guy, is your deck casual? Cool. That's all I care about. Oh, you've proxied a bunch of really expensive cards? I don't give a crap. You know, Survival of the Fittest is a really fun card that is really, really fantastic in a lot of decks, like my Gyrus deck that I talked about that I did in my Underwhelming Commanders video. It's just a fantastic card for that commander. So if you want to proxy it, okay. I mean, who am I to complain? You know, at the end of the day, for me, everything comes back to I want to just sit down and have a fun, casual game of Commander, and proxying is certainly not going to interfere with that at all. Now, if you want to proxy a whole bunch of super busted cards so that you can win the game really, really quickly, that I would have an issue with. For me, I'm going to have a way bigger issue with the guy who sits down at the table and combos off on turn 3 or 4, rather than the guy who sits down and just wants to play a bunch of cards that he can't afford in proxy version. So, you know, I don't know. What's the social contract there? What's the Commander etiquette? I don't know. Like I said, I played proxy cards in Modern, okay, where that's actually a sanctioned format. You know, Commander isn't. Commander is more of a, I mean, I guess it's starting to become a tournament thing now. It never used to be. There never really was a lot of tournament play. It's not really sanctioned. Of course, now that it's the most popular format, a lot of people are talking about these things that before nobody really cared. You know, playing gold bordered cards, that's another one. That's another thing that someone mentioned in the comments of that video is, should people be able to play gold bordered cards? cards? Yeah, go ahead. What do I care? Why did they print gold-bordered cards in the first place? Did they print those gold-bordered cards just for people to look at? I mean, maybe they do. That seems silly. I think you should absolutely be able to play with the gold-bordered cards. Now, whether or not you can play with them in a tournament, I don't know. That's really not my wheelhouse, talking about tournaments and sanctioned events and all that kind of stuff. For me, Commander is a casual format where a couple of people sit down at a table and play a fun casual game, and whether you're playing gold-bordered cards or proxies, I don't care. That doesn't affect how fun the game is for me or for anyone else, in my opinion anyway. I just thought I would make this video because it just seems like price and cost seems to be an issue that comes up in a lot of the comments of a lot of my videos, you know, and it's something that I definitely am familiar with and have dealt with since the early days of my Magic playing career. And yes, I know, I realize that if you unbanned the Moxes, for example, which by the way, I'm not necessarily for that. In that video, I was saying, what's the difference between Sol Ring and a Mox Sapphire? To me, they're both the same, other than obviously one costs a lot more price-wise, but on a power level, I think they're basically the same. And yes, obviously what you're going to have if you unban the Moxes is you probably will have a lot of guys that are just going to throw a Mox Sapphire in their deck just to show off and say, hey, I got one and you don't. That's been a thing in Magic since forever, and that's never going to change. And also, maybe there's guys out there that have been playing Magic for a long, long time and just cracked a Mox Sapphire in a pack back in 1994 or whatever, and they actually want to play it in a deck. And I don't blame them for wanting to do that either. It's a tough one. Where do you go with it, right? Like I said, at the end of the day, for me, it's all about having a fun, casual Commander game. I think if someone played one of the Moxes in a casual game, that's not going to ruin the game for me. I'm okay with it. And whether or not that person paid $20,000 for it, or they just printed it off in their printer at home, again, doesn't change the game for me one iota. So that's just my opinion. You know, everyone is entitled to their own opinion about it, and everyone can do as they like. If you think proxying is cheating or whatever, all right, that's your opinion. For me personally, I don't have an issue with it. Just like I don't have an issue with someone sitting down across from me with an Ebon Praetor or a Limduo's Paladin deck. No issue with that at all. I have no issue with someone playing Inspiring Commander in one of their decks, even though that's technically just a Magic the Gathering arena card. Other people might have an issue with it. It's becoming a little sticky. It really is, because again, Commander was this casual, sort of almost goofy format where you did goofy things like that, and now it is the most popular format in the game. So what are you going to do? I don't know. I guess to each his own. If you have a play group, it's nice because you can figure these things out. You know, for me, I just don't like people getting bent out of shape about cost with things. You know, I don't think that, first of all, banning a card because it costs a lot, that's not a good idea. I don't think we should be going down that road. And, you know, if you can't afford to put a certain card in your deck and you don't want to proxy, just find a way around it. Removal wins games, remember? So someone wants to put a whole bunch of cheap mana positive mana rocks in their deck? Okay, go ahead. Collector Oath is just a $4 card. You know, there you go. Problem solved. There are always ways around this stuff. I didn't think that I would be talking about price so much on my channel. I started doing it on my 10 cards videos just to give people an idea of how much cards cost. And I even had people in the early days of making those videos tell me, don't just put budget cards in these lists. I want to see the expensive ones because I got money and maybe I want to buy it. So I don't really want to be exclusive on my channel to people that just have money. I also don't want to be exclusive to the people that just want to play budget decks either, right? I like to give people options on my channel, and if it works for you, then it works for you. Great. If not, try something else. I got lots of options on my channel. But what do you guys think? How much is price an issue for you when building decks? Is proxying okay? And to what extent? You know, what kind of limitations would you put on it? Let me know in the comments below. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.